Hello, welcome. My name is Sang-Hwa Lee. I'm the professor of Handong Global University at the School of Global Entrepreneurship and ICT. This is my second class of building business strategy, and the topic of the second class is problem-solving 7-step process. In my previous class, we talked about strategic thinking process overview. Let me summarize the important learnings of the previous class. Okay. The first thing is the difference between strategic thinking and intuitive thinking. Strategic thinker do not provide the answer instantly. Instead, he set the decision-making criteria and collect a lot of relevant data to make a conclusion. Okay? He relies on the outside, external, objective evidence for decision making. But intuitive thinkers rely his or her past experiences or prior knowledges to make a decision. And intuitive thinker present the answers very quickly. Okay? But a lot of people have a different arguments or different opinions based on his prior experiences or knowledges. If a certain environment, it's very difficult for the intuitive thinkers to make a consensus. In that case, instead of arguing very strongly, it's better to decide the decision-making criteria and go outside to collect objective evidence and then come back and review those objective evidences. By doing that, it's easier for them to make the consensus. Okay, as I said, we are living in a very uncertain environment. So in that case, the prior experiences or knowledges, the importance of the prior experiences or knowledges are diminishing. So we have to rely more on the objective evidence for the judgment. That's one thing, the difference between intuitive thinking and strategic thinking. And the second thing I emphasized in my previous class is that 4 key elements of strategic thinking. The first element is information seeking. So as I said, to make a decision based on the strategic thinking, we have to rely on the outside objective evidence. So strategic thinker always seek information with curiosity, and he enjoys collecting objective data to make a decision. Okay? And the second element of the strategic thinker is that this aggregating big problems into small pieces. And then the third element is conceptual thinking. That means aggregating a lot of key findings into one big solutions. And then finally, the fourth element of the strategic thinking is leading and driving. And finally, in the strategic thinking exercise, I also emphasize the importance of implementation. So building business strategy is important, but implementing such strategy is also important. Okay, now let me move on to the next topic. That's today's topic of problem-solving 7-step process. This slide shows the very simple 7 steps to solve the problems. This is developed by global strategy consulting firm named McKinsey & Company. So in McKinsey, this is the process of solving the problems. So if you see on the left-hand side, inside the circle, there is a problem. There might be a lot of problems, but in order to solve the problem, we have to pick the most important problems. And then the first step of problem solving is define the problem, defining the problems. And then the second step is this aggregating the issues. The third step is prioritizing the issues. The fourth step is developing work plans for analysis. The fifth step is conducting the analysis. And the sixth step is aggregating the outputs after the analysis is conducted. And then the final step is developing presentation materials. And then after those 7 steps, we reiterate this process again and again. Even though we define the problem and the solution is found, still there is some missing parts we have to address. And in that case, we will reiterate this problem-solving process again and again, starting from the defining the problem again, disaggregating the issues, prioritizing the issues, and then develop the work plan, conduct the analysis, and aggregating the outputs, and developing presentation materials again. And in doing this process, there's also the communication which should be done in each step. So when defining the problem, you have to communicate with the key stakeholders. That might be the customers or the clients or somebody who is supposed to implement the outputs. And in the second step of disaggregating the issues, you still have to communicate your findings. And communication should be conducted in all the 7 steps. Okay? Out of this 7-step process, what do you think is the most important step out of the 7 problem-solving steps? I think the first step of defining the problem is the most important and the critical. If you are taking an exam, and even though you have a lot of knowledges and then you studied a lot, but if you make a mistake in reading the problems, your answer might be the wrong answer. Okay? That's why in taking the exam, we have to read the questions very carefully, at least 3 times before addressing the answers, right? In solving the problems, it's the same. Defining the problem is the most important thing. When I was a consultant, typically our team spends 2 or 6 months, or in some cases 12 months to solve the client's problems. And in the worst case, our team did a lot of our efforts to analyze a lot of the problems, and then we may draw a very persuasive conclusions, and then finally make a presentation to our clients. And in that case, if the client's response to our final presentation or suggestion might be, okay, the solution might be very interesting, but that's not solution of the problem I asked you to tackle. In that case, that's the disaster. It's like climbing a wrong mountain. Okay? In case we define the problems very properly, and then in the middle of our analysis, if we make some mistakes, that's still fine, because we can revisit some of our analysis and then come back to come up with a slightly revised solutions. But if we tackle the wrong problems, or which is very different from the client's request, and if we spend a lot of time to tackle such wrong problems, then that's a disaster. So defining the problem is the most important and critical step in solving the problems very powerfully. Okay. In defining the problem stage, we have to think about the impact of our solution. So out of a lot of problems, with the discussion with the customers, clients, we have to pick what is the most important problem to tackle, and what is the most impactful problem out of a lot of the problems we want to consider to solve. Okay? Because our resources are very limited, we want to pick the most important problem to tackle, which has the greatest impact on the organization. And in the second step of disaggregating the issues, think about disaggregation and early hypothesis. We cannot, our time for building the business strategy is very limited, maybe 2 months or 3 months. In some cases, it's less than a week. So during very constrained timeline, we have to develop a very powerful strategy. So as always, we have to try to set our early hypothesis as early as possible. And then by exploring such hypothesis is true or not, we may come up to the solutions more effectively and efficiently. So setting the early hypothesis is important. And in setting the early hypothesis, we have to think what is the most critical factor of the defined problems. So the second step of problem solving is disaggregating the problems into the small but important issues. That reminds me of the previous class lectures, that the elements of the strategic thinking. One of the elements of the strategic thinking is analytical thinker. And when I say the analytical thinker, he's a person to disaggregate the big problems, the sophisticated problems, into the small issues. So that is something we have to do in the second step.